and the author Jeremy Farley is in studio this morning. I'll tell you what, Jeremy, good morning. How are you?
Doing well. I appreciate you having me today.
I appreciate you being here this morning. It's greatly appreciated that you're even here. And to have an author in here is awesome. And we get some of those in here every now and then. And here we are. A Virginia gentleman. It's recent. How long has that been out now?
This has been out for the better part of a month, so I would say it's definitely recent.
Yeah, we'll call that recent for sure. The title of the book is Cursed Mountain, The Preacher's Son and the Devil's Land. That already is intriguing within itself. And, I read a little bit of the back on this and saw what the story is about. And that's an interesting concept as well. Someone that looks like they're at the crossroads of something and chose a path.
Absolutely, and the book is a historical fiction based on the West Virginia coal mining wars, and I don't know that your audience is probably very familiar with this, but there's a lot of similarities in the oil boom that happened in the state of Texas around that same time as what was going on in West Virginia. And just give you a quick little history lesson there. West Virginia seceded from Virginia during the Civil War, and West Virginia at the time was just this pristine, beautiful mountain state, and once it was realized that coal was in that area, railroads came in, and immediately the northern capitalists came in and started buying up the land, and in a lot of ways were doing a lot of unscrupulous things in order to get that land. And it's very reminiscent of what happened with the oil here in this state. And so you've got all of these outsiders that have moved into the state and one by one just gobbled up the mineral rights to the people's land, and they did it very underhandedly, very shady. And so a generation later, in the early 1900s, you have people in West Virginia who didn't have any land, they didn't have any mineral rights, and so the mines from that point on in a lot of ways had slave labor. And so you've got people that are working for the coal mines, and they're not being even paid in cash, they're being paid in scrip, which is a form of private currency. And you can only do business there at the company store, and you can basically, your whole life revolves around the company. They own you. And about 20 years into this, then the people started wising up and at least try to figure out ways to get out of that. And this book kind of mirrors that history in West Virginia of the uprising of the people trying to get their personal liberties back against the coal companies who had basically started holding them hostage.
And does this book go through a short period of time or a generation of time?
In a lot of ways, it is a generational book. It is, and I'll tell a little bit about the book. It begins with the land itself speaking, and the land talking about how the land has seen over the last 500 years the Native Americans that were there. And first it was the Mingo tribe, and then after the Mingo tribe, then the white settlers arrived, the French fur traders, and the English colonists. And moving forward, it just kind of highlights the way the land remains and the inhabitants of the land is constantly changing, and then the coal companies take over, and then you blend into this 99-year-old man who is talking about his life, and he's reminiscing over it. He's extraordinarily wealthy, and yet as he looks back on his life, he's done a lot of damnable things that leave him to where he regrets everything he's done. And the overriding arch of the story is to get us to think about the decisions we make. There will come a day of reckoning with them, and that's kind of the theme of the book. Is
Sure.
There's a day of reckoning coming for all of us.
Interesting concept. Now, you mentioned the history aspect of it. And what piqued your interest to do this type of book, or are you just a history guy as well that just kind of can add real history to a fictional story?
I'm definitely a history guy, but my family, they all hail from the coal fields of West Virginia.
Gotcha.
And my great-great-grandfather was one of the miners who marched on Blair Mountain. Now, Blair Mountain was a time in West Virginia history. It was a location where the coal miners basically took up arms against the coal companies, and the coal companies were in bed with the local government, and so they had the government resources, and the United States military actually got involved. This is in the early 1920s, and a lot of people don't realize how close America was in the days following World War I of actually seeing a revolution. And it would have been probably a communist revolution, because the same thing had happened in Russia with the Bolshevik revolution. And so fortunately that never happened, but it was a very trying time in America's history during those early years after the World War I.
That's interesting, because I'll be honest with you, I love books
Right.
that have history intertwined with a fictional story. Ken Follett is one of my favorite authors.
Yes.
I don't know if you know who that is, but Ken Follett is also one of those guys that intertwines history with a fictional character or story. but real history along with it. But
Right.
it's funny that's the way this book kind of is, I guess, according to what we're talking about right now. And I kind of like that, where there's history involved within the story. That's pretty cool. Now, you were saying that family was involved in coal and things like that. Is that what piqued the interest in doing something like this? Was that a big part of it, or is this your first book, or do you have others as well?
I've written quite a bit on Appalachia and Appalachian history.
Okay.
And so I think this was kind of a natural progression from that. And so I've also written a few others about that aren't fictional, more historic, but this is my first novel. And I think if I write any additional novels, it's going to certainly be from the standpoint of history, just because I feel like taking something that is so historical in nature and making it to where it's a human storyline with it goes a long way. I think for me, one of my favorite books, and I don't know how familiar you might be with it, is The Sun by Philip Meyer, and talking about just Texas history. And I don't think that for a moment this even begins to scratch that surface, but hopefully to some degree this does for the state of West Virginia, maybe what he's done for Texas.
So how does it start? I mean, where do you begin when you decide I'm going to do something? Is it an idea that you put to paper for a page or two, or is it? How do you even begin? I guess is what I'm asking, Jeremy.
I think for me, this was something that was several years in the making, and it began with a tunnel. There's a tunnel in Dingus, West Virginia, which is in Mingo County, called the Dingus Tunnel. It is a mile-long train tunnel, and now there's a road that runs through it, and so the only way into town is through that tunnel.
Oh, wow.
And it had been previously a railroad tunnel, and I remember my grandmother telling me stories about how there would be murders that would take place outside of that tunnel, and people, very bad men, would kill people on the trains. And one day I just thought, I'm going to put that story to, print, and I penned that first chapter of just a little girl watching a murder outside of the train tunnel. And then the days that followed, I would add a little bit to it, add a little bit to that. And then over the course of time, the girl evolved into a boy, and then the boy, I started writing the backstory of him being a man. And
yeah.
The seeds had been there for a very, very long time, but it wasn't until I started piecing together a story. And so the way I write a story or write a book is I've got one central element that I've got in mind, which is this event. For me, it was a murder at that tunnel. And moving from that, you write a chapter or two just of that scene, and then you've got the basis of a story. What goes from there? And
then I guess that goes circular from there.
Absolutely.
Maybe before and even after that. Is that kind of what happens?
Yeah, and then over the course of time, I will make an outline and have the storyline, essentially 30 chapters or so.
Wow.
But then that's always evolving. Nothing is set in stone, because as the story progresses, naturally new characters just develop themselves, and then as you look back on it, certain people that you thought might have a more prominent role, suddenly you realize they're kind of boring, and so it's time to kill them off.
Well, so let me ask you, Jeremy, is writing the way you do, is there a discipline to writing, or is it just free in the sense that, oh, I've got an idea, I got to go do this now? Or is there a discipline where you're sitting down and forcing yourself to think, and does that even work if you do that?
I think for me, I can't say, all right, between 7 a.m. and 8 a.m.
Yeah.
I'm going to write. It's more of throughout the day, certain things will happen. Throughout the day, you'll interact with somebody that you just find to be a naturally interesting person.
Gotcha.
And I know for me, I have 3 children and then a wife, and during the day and whenever I'm done with what I do during the day,
they provide the story.
Yeah, that's I have to wait till everybody is asleep and the lights are out, and most of this book was written probably at 2 a.m.
Okay, I gotcha. So it's not a discipline. It's not a thing where you can just sit and say this is it. It's more of ideas through the day, maybe write a little note and then go back and continue.
That's exactly how it works for me. If I try to force myself to do it, it's crazy. The older I get, I can look at a computer screen and be asleep immediately. So it's something I can't force.
That is great and true.
Yeah, yes.
That is great and true. No, that's really interesting on how that comes to fruition. And what is a time frame for the type of novel that you wrote that it takes to put all this together? And I'm not talking about going to publishing. I mean, just
right.
The writing part itself. What is that time frame? I guess that varies.
It does. I think with The Son, if I'm not mistaken, it took him 10 years to write that.
Wow.
And this book here was probably maybe 8 years ago whenever I wrote that first chapter about the little girl outside of the tunnel watching the murder. One thing I have realized, though, is that there has to be a degree of discipline. I know that earlier we said that there's absolutely no
sure,
discipline.
but I get what you're.
Yeah, I mean, it's as you get closer and start seeing that finish line, you've got to force yourself to just ride this thing through and be done with it.
Sure, I got you. Well, I'll tell you what, 8 years in the thought process to the finished product anyway,
right?
As far as the writing is concerned, that's a long time. And I guess a lot of people probably do not realize the effort and time that goes into, in other words, it isn't just, so if I sit down for 2 months, I've got this book out because it's all in my head. That's not quite the way it works, obviously.
No, and I think that there are some writing classes that will teach if you write a page a day, you can have a novel in like 3 or 4 months. And you can write a novel in 30 days if you have the discipline to do 5 to 10 pages or whatever. But it's what I think about a good story and a good storyteller is that nothing is forced.
Yeah, I'm with you there. I think when you just said that, my thought process was, then how much of you, how do you say this? How much of that person who did something like that, a page a day, put in enough thought and process into that, being forced to do whatever force is, to do a page a day? Did you get the full outcome of what you really wanted based on the fact that you made yourself sit down to do something a page a day? I would think that someone that took their time and formulated that story and expanded it or did whatever to it, I would think it'd be a much better product.
I hope so, and maybe that's going to be the selling point then, is we'll just say it took a long time to get this. And if you think about per hour what you get paid whenever you write a book like this, if you've got 10 years worth of work into it, that'll make a person sad real quickly.
Yeah, no, I guess that could. Now, let me ask you this as well then. So you're here today.
Right.
What does that entail for you as you travel across? Are you traveling across to promote? What is it that you do from that point now that it's come out?
Now that this book is out, we're going on radio shows like this and just talking to different individuals. Last week we did a media blitz through the state of West Virginia and did a lot of talking to West Virginia radio stations and West Virginia television, and it's been well received within the state of West Virginia. But what my goal is for something like today is reach out to, and I love the state of Texas, and any excuse to come to Texas is always a good one.
No,
but,
absolutely.
I'm doing some teaching classes here in the days ahead, and while I'm here, I just thought it'd be a great opportunity to share with the Texas audience a book that really kind of highlights a similarity to this state's own history. And the thing I love about Texas is that there is no particular person who is a Texan. Texas is a very diverse and unique state.
No, absolutely.
But so many of the original white settlers in Texas come from the very places that are mentioned in this book right here. And you think about Stephen F. Austin and the original group that he brought here. A lot of those were Southwest Virginians, a lot of those were East Tennessee folks, and so it's really cool for me to take something like this and bring it to a place like this here. So I appreciate that part of it. Another thing that I have always enjoyed about this particular state is just the history of it. I'm being a history guy myself. I appreciate the history that Texas offers, and I see so many similarities between the state of West Virginia and Texas, and hopefully my Texas friends don't take offense at that.
No, well, you did say, in fact, that this is a story that takes place in West Virginia, but is a story for all and has a message for all as well. So that's fantastic. Folks, we're talking to Jeremy Farley, author, who has a book called Cursed Mountain, The Preacher's Son in the Devil's Land. Let me ask you something, Jeremy. You've got, if you don't mind telling us the name of a couple of characters. And then I guess my question is, though, do you get attached to these characters, and is some of the underlying characters someone you're more attached to than the main character? Just curious as to how that works.
Probably every character in the book is modeled in personality after someone.
Okay.
And so the folks that might know me, maybe that gives them a good incentive to read the book and then try to see if they can see anybody they know. Yeah, exactly.
Sure.
But the main character, his name is Thomas Basden, and he is the 99-year-old man who is looking back over the course of his life. And one thing that I admire about this man is really a scoundrel in every sense of the word. He was a murderer. He was somebody that would take individuals' wives. He was a thief. He did a lot of bad things over the course of his life. But what I admire about this man is that there's an element to him where he stands for he stands for righteousness in some twisted, weird way. And it's getting to write him, and the story is told from his perspective, a lot of it. But he's one that you just can't help but love, even though he's the villain in the story almost.
Sure.
And then there are others. There's and I'm trying to think of. He has a younger brother who is a good kid, but he's just too soft for that land. He is educated, and he is interested in making something of himself. And that land of southern West Virginia during the Cold Wars was no place for someone like him. And you can see elements of yourself probably in each of the characters. The traits of yourself you don't like, you can write into the villains, and the person you aspire to be, maybe you can make him some of the other folks.
That's interesting. That really is. And I'm glad you answered that, because it's you always wonder, okay, do they get attached to that character, and then when it's time for that book to end, is there a sadness, or for you, or is there I'm sure there's a sense of relief, it's over, I got it done, but is there a sadness that book has come to an end, or I don't know anything about the character yet, right? I've not read the book, so I don't know what happens to the character, and nor should you say, but is there a sadness when a book comes to an end?
I know for me, whenever I wrote the end period, it felt on one hand like I had graduated, and that feeling of the excitement of being done and accomplishment, but then it also kind of had the feeling of the night after Christmas when it's like, oh, now what? And so and it got to where it's like, well, I guess I'm gonna have to spend time with my family now or something. It's whenever I got to the end, there was this sense of, what do I do now? And so, and I guess then you come to Texas and talk to baseball coaches.
Yeah, that's exactly.
Yeah.
Nice. Where can we get this?
Amazon.com is probably the easiest. Just type in Cursed Mountain, Jeremy Farley, and you should be able to find that book there. Basically wherever books are sold, if you ask for it, they should be able to find it.
Okay. Another question then, as you travel around and you're going from place to place, the type of characters that you meet on this journey, do you sometimes think, man, I could have had him in this book or her in this book?
And that's what I love about writing, is that it's never ending, because it's funny, I'm going to tell on myself just a little bit right here. I got done with writing this book, and we've got a week or so to where I'm just kind of taking a break and not writing. And my poor wife, she's very supportive, but I told her, I was like, I'm going to write a history of the state of California, and we're going to kind of do a fictional account of how California became a state. And she says, yeah, it's great. And I get a page into it, and then I go to her and I'm like, hey, I just realized I'm going to write a story about every generation of Americans. And she's like, okay, that's great. And I'm on my fifth, hey, I'm going to write about this type thing. And it's you basically, it's like throwing spaghetti at the wall, and you wait and see what sticks. And so it's good to have people around you that are supportive, and whatever idea you come with, they're like, yeah, that's great, but no, at the end of the day, he's probably not going to do that. So it's anything we can do to connect to this community. I love just driving in today. I was looking out, and I was like, this is, in a lot of ways, it reminds me of my town there in Virginia. So I like that.
You ever been? So you've not been to Lampasas? Why would you? I mean,
well, I've been to Austin. I've been to High Rock and Killeen, of course. But coming here, this is one of those places it would seem like you come to on purpose, and I like towns like that. Or if you're lost,
but
no, and I think that so much as we look at how Texas is even changing. I mean, it's not the same state it was 10 years ago, and so it's whenever I see towns like this, it's a nice reminder that Texas still exists.
Yeah, well, so it doesn't have to be 3rd Street in Lampasas, but 3rd Street somewhere. Yeah, no, but that's kind of what it is. Well, Jeremy, listen, I can't thank you enough, number one, for coming in and sharing what this book is all about with us. I think that's incredible. What are your parting words for anyone who's interested and in getting the book, and what would you say would be the underlying message we're going to get out of this?
I think what you get out of this book is what you choose to get out of it, and maybe that's unique for each person, because everybody that I've talked to who have read it, I've asked them, what's your big takeaway? Mm-hmm. And it's been fascinating to hear so many different people with so many different takeaways. For me, the overriding walkaway was every action we make, there is an opposite and equal reaction. And there is going to be a day of reckoning. And for this man, I mean, he had lived to be 100 years old. He sold his soul to get riches, to get wealth, to get power. And he sold his soul whenever he was just a young man, knowing that on his 100th birthday, he was going to be called to pay that price. And it seemed like a really good deal whenever he was in his early 20s. But at 99 years old, just on the eve of your birthday, I mean, that's certainly
the reflection, not right.
Absolutely. And so it's a reflection of his life. And so I think the big takeaway there is just be very mindful of that there is going to be a day of reckoning. And then as far as this book is concerned, hopefully the reader can look at it and recognize, there's something to history that maybe we don't need to stuff away, and actually look at it and learn some lessons from it. So
there you go.
It's
Cursed, folks, Cursed Mountain, the Preacher's Son and the Devil's Land. Again, that is Jeremy Farley you're listening to, and that is Jeremy Farley you're looking at if you're on Facebook Live right now. And you can get that on Amazon.com. Listen, I can't thank you enough for coming in. Thank you so much. We're going to get you to sign the wall. I don't know if we have anybody from West Virginia on that wall, but we will here soon.
Awesome. Yeah.
But we will here soon. But folks, be sure if you can, pick up the book, Cursed Mountain, by Jeremy Farley at Amazon.com. And look, I like history. And I like stories that involve history. That there's some truth to the history with stories intertwined within it. I love that kind of book. I always have. So I got a feeling it's going to be a fantastic read. I'm very excited to get this read just because of the fact that it goes right along the lines of what I like.
Yeah.
So I think that's awesome. And I like books that have a crossroads decision within it as well. And I say crossroads, and I say that just because of the crossroads. Yeah. Where you can sell your soul to the devil and make a choice of what you want to do. But listen, Jeremy, thank you so much. Man, I tell you what, safe travels to you wherever else you're headed. Right, as you continue on your travel.